Okay, guys, I would like to get started by thanking you all for coming along today. Welcome to the first of our series of webinars to bring this sector together, share learnings, and really just keep the conversation going during this difficult time. Our focus is on practical optimism at this time, and my name is James Martin. I'm from Insider Guides. We make guides and online content to prepare, welcome, and support international students coming to Australia, and we also help organisations reach and talk to international students at different stages of the timeline. We will, at Insider Guides, keep producing and curating content through this crisis to ensure international students have the best information at hand. And I will put a few resources in the chat box, and after this webinar you'll receive some more resources from Insider Guides that you can share with your students and to help them. Also, Rebecca, who you hear from in a minute, has a lot of resources over at Austrade that she can provide as well. So yeah, we will continue to do these webinars at the same time every week from now on to help keep the sector informed. And yeah, I'll make sure you hear about them. Obviously, this is a new thing. I had this at 500 capacity, and we sold out in about 3 days. It's fantastic that there's so much interest in this. I'll look to perhaps increase the number of registrations for next time, and we'll look at different ways of delivering it, but it's just great to see the response. All right, so we'll move on. A little bit of an opening by me. I'll start by focusing on the students themselves who are affected here. For many, this was their dream to study in Australia, and if they're offshore, they now find themselves banned from entering. If they're onshore, they're now in a totally different version of what they thought life would be like in Australia. Campuses are closing, new students have no social support network here, and for many, they've just lost their part-time job, and many can't return home. They're now in a state of limbo about what will happen to them over the next few months. The financial and mental anguish must be pretty immense. Meanwhile, the sector itself, like a range of sectors globally and locally, are suffering on a range of fronts. And so really the purpose of this webinar is to do a few things. It's to take stock of what is happening. It's to have a look at the response, the immediate response, the long-term response, and really where to from here for the sector. As I said, practical optimism is really the only way forward here. And with that, I'd like to introduce two of the most optimistic experts I know in the sector. First one is Rebecca Hall, who is the Senior Industry Expert at Austrade. Rebecca leads Austrade's engagement in promoting Australia's international education sector. She forms part of the Trade and Investment Senior Leadership Team, engaging across Austrade's global network. Rebecca oversees Austrade's AEI 2025 strategy and Austrade services to support international education, the international education sector, and keep it sustainable. Prior to joining the Australian government, Rebecca led the international education strategy for the Queensland and Victorian governments. So a very interesting and diverse set of experiences there. So the second is Aleksandr Voninski, who is a partner at Edified. Alec is a partner at Edified, a consultancy of education industry experts across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Alec works with institutions and organisations on developing and implementing strategy and sourcing fit-for-purpose solutions for clients and industry partners. Alec was previously the Executive Director of International at UNSW Sydney and held roles in the strategy office there as well. He has held leadership positions in the AUIDF and the Group of 8 International Directors Forum. He's currently undertaking his doctoral studies in the University of Southern California, focused on how institutions are resourcing themselves to enhance the international student experience. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll give a little bit about the format here. Attendees can ask questions. You can ask questions in the Q&A function. And please do feel free to do so and type your comments here in the chat box to the right. At the end, we will answer some of those questions. However, if Alec or Rebecca know the answer quickly and easily, they can just type it in as well, and everyone will be able to see the response as well. So This is a new experience for all of us, and it really is sort of the new normal at the moment anyway. And so, yeah, I'll dive right into some questions. And at the end of it, we will send this as a recording to everyone who was in this webinar and who couldn't make it, and also through our industry news. So don't worry if your colleagues couldn't get in. Yeah, we'll sort that out. Okay, so let's focus on right now. Where are we at right now? So Rebecca, I'll sort of start with you. How is this situation playing out for the Australian international education sector?
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot, James, and thank everyone for your interest. I'm going to actually start by acknowledging my extra support person here, support animal here. This is Tessa. She's joining us for the webinar. And just in case she barks, you know where it's coming from. The context, if you asked me on any day from the 9th of January to now, every story and every response would be different. I think for the international education sector, though, we have been feeling this and aware of the significant potential impacts of COVID-19 since it emerged in China, and are probably much more ahead than some of our community members and family members on understanding the impact. It does mean, though, that we've been through layers of managing through the crisis, layers of particularly for our universities and the number of students from China who were unable to join for semester one. And of course, as every week progresses, we enter a new level of decisions by government to first and foremost protect public health here in Australia. And I think it's important to note, when we talk about Australians, we mean anyone who is here in Australia. It is about protecting public health, and that does include international students, of course, temporary workers and other migrants. One of the ways, I know we're not going to use many slides today, James, but one of the slides I think just to put up in terms of context would be slide 3, because this is not a China-Australia problem. This is a global problem. And one of the things that we're obviously looking at, we'll go back to that slide, is also major countries that are main destinations for student mobility, and what COVID is presenting, and how those countries are also responding as well. We talk about resources, James. One of the resources that I use every day on my phone, or if I need to check, is this one from Johns Hopkins. I know you've probably all got your go-to resources now, but this is a really good interactive map to see where each of our countries are around the world. I think one of the things that you would have seen and heard in the media is the US actually significantly rising and at over 30,000 now. And in terms of a country with significant international student and temporary labour is going to be facing significant challenges. Australia's cases, this was from a day or two ago. I know you're well aware of those details, but for international students who are predominantly in our major cities, in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, I think 85% of international students in those locations obviously being reported around the world as the epicentre. I'll focus on institutions quickly too, and I'm sure Alex got some views on this, but where we're up to in terms of institutions, I think it has been a very swift move from our universities and education providers to pivot to online. And despite some challenges, I think we actually should be celebrating the mammoth effort that has gone into moving full programs online, but also Australia's strong history. We've done distance education, online education well. This is a chance to continue it. And also TEXA and ASQA's quick movements to be able to enable that. You did hit on the reality though. I work for Austrade. Austrade works with many other export sectors, but this is the only export sector that if you can't offer the service, your client is still here in Australia. That has an extra dimension and challenge, of course, and an obligation for us as a group to manage that. So I think I'll leave it there, just trying to
Yeah.
not go into all the minutiae detail, but that's certainly where we're up to.
Yeah, and it's obviously there's no clear and easy answers here. But Alec, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, here's Australia's education sector, international education sector, which brings in $30 to $40 billion for the economy every year, and we're facing a lot of losses here. Where are we going to? How can we ride this out? Actually, can we ride this out, or can we? Will it be in ruins at the end of this pandemic?
Good question. Thanks, James. Nothing like an easy question to start off with. Before we talk about, I think, dollars and revenue loss, I'd really like to acknowledge first the immense work and commitment from our industry colleagues, industry stakeholders, from government to institutions, academics, student recruitment, student support staff, agents, all the unsung heroes out there that have been working tirelessly over the last probably 6 to 8 weeks on the myriad of issues that have popped up since this virus has been thrust upon us. So look, we're in extraordinary times, and which really call for extraordinary measures, which we are seeing. But we can't lose sight of the fact that, extraordinary people make this industry, what it is. It makes this industry great. And it is the people that will help us weather the storm, refocus, and rebuild the international education industry. We have to believe in that. We can't lose sight of the fact that we will overcome this, and then it's up to us to pull our socks up and get to it. So what's the impact, though? Well, you'd have to be an optimist to believe that semester 2 is going to produce fantastic results for anyone. And I'm not a pessimist by nature, but it's a harsh reality right now. And the reason I say that, it's going to take time to ramp up the myriad of support services, the myriad of services that support our industry. Think of IELTS language testing, Qantas, Cathay, Singapore Airlines, operations and connections, immigration visa issuing, education agency support, not to mention the messaging of we are open for business now. That's going to take continual work to prospective students. Prospective students are going to need layers of engagement and supportive messaging, and we can't underestimate all the cogs in the wheel and the life cycle of student recruitment that have to be aligned to make it happen. And so this is where we see the multitude of links in the chain that support our industry. You lose one and one weekends, perhaps we can cope. You lose multiple links, and the chain no longer resembles anything coherent. And we're somewhat in a jumbled mess, unfortunately, of confusion right now, despite the great things that have occurred in terms of getting us geared up for semester 1. So I guess to answer your question, will the sector be in ruins at the end of this pandemic, and can we ride it out? One, it depends on your perspective and how you measure the situation. Ruins are something you see in Greece and Italy. Ruined has a forever and ever ring to it, and this is not a forever situation. We have to just take stock of that. Year on year, yes, it's a significant challenge, if not a disaster for certain facets of our industry. No one and no institution is left unscathed, whether minor or major. So it has an impact on everyone. But let's look, it's a disaster as well for our collective energy, our mental well-being and stamina as people working in this industry. This goes for industry professionals as well as the students that we support. So we do need to look after ourselves and our students to make sure we can rebuild and get back to where we were. So, however, this pandemic, however this pandemic will end, and these broken links of the chain I just mentioned start to mend, international education will return. The fundamentals are still there. The need for education is still there. The need for students to develop skills and knowledge is still there. We have Australian students that missed out on NCP and exchange programs that want a second chance, and they should deserve a second chance. And Australia will remain an attractive destination for travel, work, and education. So whilst everything appears to have fallen apart around us, there are many things that will remain strengths for the medium term. So, it's difficult to measure how many years this might set back our industry as the situation is evolving. This week doesn't look like last week, and next month will look different again. So we'll take a big whammy to hit on our enrollments and bottom line for this semester and likely next semester as well. And unfortunately, we will lose good people in the industry to job losses, potentially in budget cuts. Long-established education agents we work with may fold, or they might merge to survive. Families of prospective students will have savings lost that are, earmarked for education. Some institutions like English language colleges or private providers may unfortunately fold, and institutions will shed courses and invest in infrastructure. That's just the reality of what we face, and I've only just skimmed the surface. It will be painful, it will be uncertainty, but let's just remember that recessions don't last forever. Government investment and support will kick in. Consumer confidence will return. Life will crawl back to normal, and people will literally be aching to get out of their house, and hopefully out of their country and hop on an airplane to go somewhere new, whether it's travel or whether it's for education. We're going to be aching to get out. And so from the ashes, we should expect, not to be twee, but from the ashes, we should expect that the phoenix of the education industry will rise anew with new ideas and ways of hybrid teaching and learning. And we'll be, we're improving our digital outreach, engaging with prospective students creatively, and how, industry and government work collaboratively. It's all going to happen.
I agree.
Therefore, it's imperative upon us to really cast our eyes ahead towards 2021 and beyond, and really think, right, how are we going to make this happen?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and it is, and I'd like to get to that a bit later on about how we actually are going to bounce back, because I think that's really critical. Rebecca, the Australian government's put together a task force to sort of help us get together. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and it strikes me that in these times of crisis, the role of government does tend to become more prominent, and people sort of, over the years, they sort of forget how government really adds value in their lives until something like this does happen. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the government is doing, and how they're keeping the sector informed, and how we're all working, and how we work together.
Sure. Okay, thank you. I was actually just going to build on Alex's comments there as well. One of the principles that we've been using in Austrade since January, when we came back to work, and when the task force was first created, without being too government about it, we said there are 3 C's that we need to bring to this every day. We need to bring care for our students, care for our colleagues, care for people who might be feeling this harder than we are. We need to bring a collaborative mindset and collaboration, true collaboration. No one wins here. The winner is getting the right information, making the right policy decisions, and that means we do need to collaborate at a whole new level. And really, creativity. I have been quite amazed over the past couple of months how quickly we've been able to move on some things. Now, I know outside that is never fast enough. But we have really taken a creative approach to try and move things through. Interestingly, and some of you might have heard me, I have done a podcast before where I have 8 other C's, so I won't keep going into those. But the task force actually was created in response to the bushfires, and it was an initiative from Minister Tian as the Education Minister, fully supported by Minister Birmingham, who is our Trade Minister, and also others who are part of the Council for International Education. Interestingly, though, when the task force was set up, I think we had just had our first cases, or sadly death, in China from COVID-19 or novel coronavirus as we knew it back then. I don't think we fully appreciated the task of the task force at that time in terms of managing one of the most, if you've heard prime ministers and others talk of this, the most serious disruption to Australian life that many of us will have ever known, community, economic, social. So the task force is supported by the Department of Education and has all of us as government agencies involved. I think a particular hallmark of the task force is all states and territories, those study clusters that many of you work with, like where you are, Study Adelaide, Study New South Wales, Study Queensland, every one of those is involved. And that's actually one of the changes that you've seen nationally when you hear our leaders talking about their National Coordinating Committee a couple of weeks back. That was a federal government committee. It now includes every state and territory minister as well, because this is not something about leaving to one level of government to deliver. It involves integrated government services. I think the task force is made by people who represent, I'm sure many of you on the webinar, the peak bodies, but also for Austrade, one of the key members and one of the key, I think, innovators for us moving forward is the EdTech sector. So EduGrowth is one of the members of the task force and is bringing a very strong view around the role of EdTech companies, suppliers and Australian innovation to help us respond during this time. Many of you would have also seen and been following closely the government stimulus package and determining particularly whether your business may be eligible for those announcements. And you may have also seen that there is a separate announcement about $1 billion to be allocated to impacted sectors, regions and communities. That is an ongoing process. Government is definitely listening. I know the English language sector, who we know in our sector is always the canary in the coal mine, the first to experience any kind of downturn or impact. I know they have certainly been talking to the task force and to government on that. Fundamentally though, this task force was set up not just to deal with immediate crisis, but to actually set the foundations for what's next, for what recovery looks like and how we can learn from this experience to apply in future events and other challenges, because I think we all know the world is forever changed from what we've experienced in 2020, and there will be other times where we need to rise as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's
yeah. No, it's just I mean, there's certainly some interesting reactions that are coming from the government, and it's fantastic to see the states and federal government collaborating so well. I mean, I work with a lot of the study bodies here at Insider Guides, and it's fantastic to see the feedback that they're having. They're enjoying working with the federal government in coordinating response in this. And yeah, I mean, over the weekend I received a few questions regarding how the government is responding, and one of them was about the online learning, like that you touched on. Under the current National Code of Practice, international students aren't allowed to study more than a third of their units online. Is that likely going to change?
Yeah, I think the advice from, I won't speak on behalf of education who own that legislation, but certainly all indications and public announcements from TEXA and ASQA, who regulate and administer that code, are that online learning is acceptable during these conditions. And in fact, just on Friday, made a joint announcement as well that they as regulators don't have a view on where that online learning may take place. So we are aware, in addition to, as Alec pointed out, a severe disruption to any kind of new student mobility, there are a number of students whose parents, sponsors or governments have also requested them to come home. But those students, in many cases, as we've heard, will be able to continue their studies if they were enrolled online back in their home country.
Okay.
We will send a whole heap of links afterwards. I know we're all on information overload at the moment. So one of the things Austrade's trying to do, we're not a policy agency, so we're trying to distill those and get that information to you and to stakeholders as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to remember. Like this webinar is not, Rebecca is not, a politician. She's not. She's here representing the Australian government in Austrade's capacity. But there are students out there that are, if you look on the forums right now, a lot of them are asking for reduction in fees and discounts and refunds and things like that. Obviously, institutions have a lot to look at, and that's just the institutions. It doesn't even think about the accommodation providers. Every part of the sector is going to be looking at their balance sheets and wondering what's going on. Alec, I'd like to bring you in now, just from the practical optimism sense that we talked about at the start. Have there been any interesting examples from around the world, around Australia, of a reaction to this from any part of the sector that you would look at and say that's best practice? Because I think that's, you know, something that's really important right now.
I'm loath to use the term best practice. Maybe promising practice is better, because I think
Fair
that
enough. Yeah.
On reflection we will see what is working and what is not, or what could be improved. But just, I guess, to echo what Rebecca said, she used the term innovation a few minutes ago, and I'm seeing a heck of a lot of innovation take place. And innovation breeds excitement. That excitement allows for new ways of thinking, and new ways of thinking propels positivity. I've been really, really amazed at the Herculean efforts, and I don't underestimate Herculean. I mean, absolute Herculean efforts by colleagues across the industry, the sheer volume, the pace, the time frames that they've worked under to digitize course content, adjust timetables, allow for flexibility for late enrollments. It's been absolutely tremendous. And we moved from what was perceived a China issue, a China enrollment issue, to a whole of industry, whole of sector, domestic and international student concern. And so you've had disparate units of universities work together that probably never had to actually align or have parallel interests, because they were either in siloed nature or doing their own thing. So it's all been done in record time. It's done under a lot of immense uncertainty and unease. So if you think of the once insurmountable obstacles that we thought were in our way to delivering content online, it's taken a lot of blood, a lot of sweat, tears, and internal arguments to get things over the line within institutions to get semester one course content ready to go. And the fact that most institutions fought tirelessly to remove speed humps and obstacles is a testament to the professionalism and the tenacity of academics and professionals across the industry. I'd like to point out that moving content online, whilst we're talking about promising practice, we do talk about or best practice or promising practice, that whilst we're moving content online and supporting the IT support, academics and casuals is only part of the solution. It's really imperative that we also look at the learning outcomes of the LMS platforms that we're using. We've rushed to put content out there. There are bound to be some lumps and bumps in quality that need to be continually addressed as we go through. I see that institutions are going to really need to take seriously the efficacy of their online learning tools and content. And there may be, because there's platforms, online learning platforms within faculties, within an institution that might be different from certain faculties or certain schools in the same institution. So, how institutions better share intelligence and information amongst themselves, and then broader across the industry about what content is resonating by level, by gender, by language demographics, blah, blah, blah. We really need to empower our academics so that they have the tools to course correct, measure interventions, and understand really a common baseline of learning and teaching success during semester one, so that we can go into semester two and beyond as a success, particularly if we're going to be continuing a lot of this online learning. So look, some institutions that have depth of online delivery may already have this down pat, but I believe many institutions I know, or that we may see in the industry, are learning as they go, because online delivery wasn't necessarily in their comfort zone. It may have been in fits and starts. So they're learning as they go. They've thrown so much at online migration of content so quickly. The next step is going to really be to make sure that students like what they're getting, and that the academics and administrators can measure success and improve those outcomes. So there are solutions out there that I see in the industry that have fit this need. But also, institutions are innovating and looking ahead through the use of online student recruitment tools, such as peer-to-peer platforms that leverage existing student ambassadors, linking them with prospective students. We're seeing this leverage as a student engagement tool for prospects to assess more student-generated content, so they can access more student-generated content and first-hand information from their peers. But it's also a way of keeping offer holders warm whilst they wait for travel restrictions to be lifted. And it's giving student recruitment professionals a bit of breathing space and an alternative way to engage, and which I think that we're going to see a lot more in the coming months as the travel restrictions, even as the travel restrictions are being lifted. We're not, due to budget restrictions and airline capacity, we're not going to see, we can't all of a sudden go rush out overseas. So, institutions are, meeting student support and engagement needs by monitoring student welfare and checking in with cohorts. And I think that this is where Australia is sitting at best practice or promising practice, because, we need to be checking in to our vulnerable cohorts, students that are feeling isolated. We've got mobile phone and internet and location-based technology. And this is an area where, service providers like Sonder can really make a difference in the safety and well-being of both international and domestic student cohorts that are self-isolating or studying online. And we've been working with a variety of institutions on sourcing these types of fit-for-purpose solutions. So, offline, if anyone has any questions about things that relate specifically to their institutions, I'm happy just to field any queries you may have.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you raise, especially the Australian model, where we do tend to have an international student support office in universities. A lot of them have that sense of face-to-face. I remember when I was in the UK and I was looking at how the universities there interacted with their international students. They often tried to bring them into the overall student support and just treat them like every other student, which was effective in terms of creating some synergies and making things a bit simple in terms of administration. But it also meant that it was when things like this happen, there's not a team of a very skilled team who can actually work just with international students and go from there. And if I sort of bring it back to the students a little bit, on onshore students, I mean, we've seen some parts of the retail industry and the aged care industry, benefit from the international workforce, and the work restrictions have been temporarily lifted to support these businesses and allowing approximately 20,000 international students to work full time instead of 20 hours per week or 40 hours a fortnight. I was just thinking about whether or not this can be leveraged into other parts of the economy, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Rebecca and Alec. Rebecca, I might start with you, just talking about that. What's your opinion on that so far?
Sure. I do. Sorry, that my phone just cut out there as well. Someone was trying to call me. So yes, government did move quite quickly in partnership with some parts of some employers who work very closely with international students to have a temporary relaxation of the enforcement on the 40-hour limit for work conditions. We've been talking to Home Affairs. We're hoping to have a new detailed fact sheet on that, because at the moment most people are just able to link back to those media statements. I think that is a very important move, and one that shows how important international students are in supporting the economy and in local communities. Yet we are aware, like many other Australians who work in those industries, that many people will not be able to continue their part-time work, all those work opportunities available to many, particularly those who have newly arrived and haven't yet been able to build their networks or set themselves up for success. Fortunately, it is unfortunately a new reality. Again, trying to keep positive optimism here. I was delighted to see Study New South Wales bring forward some of their initiatives on student entrepreneurship and startup. I've been super impressed with seeing how the Queensland chief entrepreneur and the startup community are responding here. I do think in terms of access to meaningful work or to continuing to contribute during studies, there is an opportunity for us to, of course, work closely with employers, but also with other not-for-profits and community organisations, whether it's those who help out people who find themselves in vulnerable situations, thinking of previous projects I've done with the likes of Salvation Army or Oz Harvest or others, but also a role for us to remind employers And as you might have seen, it's actually employers one by one of the value of international students who are here to contribute. It's important, though, at these times that we remember that international students and temporary workers are, I think it's about a million in Australia right now, and that their work rights are the same, and their conditions of work need to be the same as those of Australians as well. So we're working very closely with Fair Work Australia to make sure we get that information out too. No doubt this is an unprecedented situation for us here in Australia. In my lifetime, I have never seen lines outside of a Centrelink. I've never starting to comprehend what this could look like for students and for people in the sector as well.
Yeah, it's a new experience for us all, and I can't imagine the difficulty that it must be having on the students themselves as well. And obviously from a government perspective, there's a lot to balance in terms of providing student support, working with industry to provide some level of discount or some financial assistance, and there's so many things. So what we've been saying to students is just have a little patience. The industry is trying to come together and work through this, and this sorts of webinars are a great chance to sort of just quickly share information right across Australia. So I'm really happy that online learning is taking place in the sector as we speak. I'd like to sort of just focus on the students directly, and Alec, I'd like to sort of direct this one at you. I mean, there's social isolation. I mean, a lot when you're talking about students who and the whole Australian population is sort of socially isolating themselves bit by bit. But then there's international student social isolation. And a lot of these students have no established support network here. What resources do you think are available to them? And how can institutions best monitor that well-being? And those that are in self-isolation, is there anything we can do better?
Well, I mean, I think that, certainly that focus on supporting mental health and well-being of students has to be paramount, because, but it's not just international students, it's domestic students as well. We're in uncharted waters, and I must say my thoughts go to the student support services out there of institutions, large and small, because there are finite student support resources, and there are lots and lots of students, students who are self-isolating, students who are in quarantine, students who are studying online, students who are in share houses that maybe, online, trying to engage in online learning is not really feasible. We have had students that, domestic and international students that have, lost their part-time jobs, and that might be their means, to supporting themselves. So we have to be cognizant that people are nervous and somewhat scared probably as well about what's happening to them, what's happening to potentially their families back home. Are they going to be able to finish their course online, or course on time? These are all valid considerations. And then you look at staff, casual staff, are they going to be able to keep their jobs? There's been wonderful messaging from most institutions about protecting, the rights of casual staff. And sessional academics, but people would be worried about the future of the industry. So I think that where we see we could potentially improve what we do for student well-being, as well as engaging with students, then there are already avenues by which we have our own student service, our international student support groups on campus that are still alive and active, whether online or whatnot. But we have industry groups, IEAA, AUIDF, CISA, ISANA, NIAS, quality assurance agencies that we should be working through them and making sure we're feeding through recommendations and issues and opportunities, so that can trickle back up in a, I guess, coherent manner to various international government committees and whatnot. Look, and if we look at the kind of support that international students should receive, that we're relying on part-time work, I mean, look, the reality is that students, at least for this term, students would have passed or should have passed GTE checks. So they should have enough to support themselves through this term at a minimum. That is why we have GTE checks in place. The Australian dollar is low, it's dropped considerably. So that may assist some students and their families in the short term if the prevailing winds of Forex work in their favor. But I absolutely acknowledge the employment situation will impact students, international students working in part-time, particularly in service industries, given that hospitality has effectively been wiped off the map for the moment. With all that being said, though, I'd like to reiterate that there's several lines in the sand as an industry where we once thought we could never overcome, and they've just evaporated like that. So, for strict limitations on hours per week or per fortnight to be worked. I mean, the government has apparently removed some of these restrictions for students working in industries like supermarkets. So I think I heard that students who are in the health professions or nursing are going to be put into aged care in hospitals. So again, our restrictions out the window because it's all hands on deck. If we look at hours of online teaching, I know that there are reasons why CISA and other groups were concerned about, this is before the crisis, but the amount of hours students might study online, because isolating nature, and we want students to have an actual Australian experience. But we've been able to, TEXA and other bodies have been able to allow the industry to move very, very quickly. Again, lines in the sand move. If you think back to how long we fought in the industry for transport concessions, state by state, Herculean effort, and still, just a hodgepodge of different policies, state by state. But we see that things can change and evolve, like online study, work hour restrictions. The government is listening and can act quickly. So I think these are positive messages that we are sending to the market, and positive ways that we are supporting students in a time of uncertainty. And I think that these policies will continue to evolve. Whether or not they'll stay in place long term, that's not. It's time will tell. But I think it's good to see that we are innovating in the policy space as well to support students.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember there was a study that came out a little while ago saying that international students, they didn't really know what the Career Centre did on campus. They didn't really know the services that were available to them on campus, and they needed to be more to be done to actually bring them in and really engage with them. Well, now it's sort of the opposite, isn't it? Now it's up to the university to get it in front of them in a digital form rather than bring them in on campus. They need to work proactively to really bring students along. It's going to be an interesting time, and I mean, there's students that are here that do need to travel home. Like they do need to go home for emergency personal situations, compassionate services, things like that. I mean, are there any support services available to them, Rebecca? Is there anything around that?
I think that's another really important group to talk about, which is our global mobility. So students both here and offshore who their home governments or their sponsors have asked for them to come home. So critically though, it's now getting very challenging to be able to find a safe return home. Or to be able to afford that. So the role of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and in some countries Austrade, in offering consular support for students, and or even some of you may well have academics who are still trying to come home and otherwise. So that is a very big part. As with every, I don't know the exact, can't give you the exact number of the legislation, but certainly within our travel restrictions for Australia, there is a caveat for compassionate needs. Should a parent need to come and visit a sick child here, or should someone need to travel back home. And interestingly, those of you who are in the school sector, the original exemption for year 11 and 12 students to also still be able to enter to continue their studies, that is actually still open. So I can see on the questions there was a question about Canada, and Canada's I think commitment or intention. I'm not sure that they've officially got it confirmed, but certainly an announced intention around creating exemptions for their international students. For Australia at the moment, obviously we're taking it day by day, and we're in a very important part of managing the virus and working with public health as our number one priority.
I can cut in there.
Find out.
Rebecca, I can confirm that, yeah, the government of Canada has exempt foreign nationals who have already committed to working, studying, or making Canada their home. Yeah, so international students who hold a valid study permit or have been approved for a study permit are allowed in. So yeah, I mean, as it touches on what Alec was saying, Herculean efforts are being looked at globally to really support students. Yeah, I'd love to hear your response.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, I got you there.
There was just a cutoff, so I didn't know who are you asking the question for. There was just my screen just paused for a second.
No, it's all good. Yeah, Rebecca, I'd just love to get your thoughts on what Canada's up to.
Yes, so Canada, I did just get on their website, and whilst they have announced exemptions, they're not yet in place. So that is the challenge, I think, for any country, any time. And we know early on when we had to make the hard decisions about instigating travel restrictions, that once those, the time between they're announced and made, the varying activities or consequences that can happen during that time. But your question for me was about innovation, wasn't it? And efforts that we've made to work during this time. So online, I think, as we've mentioned early on, there were some questions though around China's policies around online. And I would say Austrade's role with our Senior Trade Commissioner, Rhett Miller, is very much on the commercial side, and we've been working directly with a number of partners and suppliers who can work with Australian institutions to ensure they can deliver their learning in China, but also through the Department of Education and their counsellor network and their government-to-government relationships have been working very closely with the Chinese government to ensure that we can gain broader recognition and understanding of the value of online.
Yeah.
We, just as you've been successful in getting all of these people onto a webinar, we've also been doing a range of webinar activities around online provision. And we're also starting the work, which I know many institutions are probably well ahead of us on, and certainly agents are, in terms of virtual recruitment and how we continue. Just because a student may not be coming here next semester, we can still be having conversations, we can still be nurturing our partners. And so Austrade, with the states and territories actually, and hopefully many of you on the webinar will be looking at what's the best way for Australia to engage, and what tools and platforms can we offer providers to use to reach those audiences. Well,
yeah, that really takes me to my next question about a sector, a part of this sector which we haven't talked about so far, which is the agents. You know, if everything is moving online, what role do you think agents are going to be playing in the future? Are they going to adapt? Is it going to change dramatically? You know, how will this change? Alec, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. I guess, if we're looking at the here and now, agents are doing it tough. And, you know, for my, education agent counselor friends and education agent director friends out there, like I feel for them, because they are also at the front line of this. And, 75% of our international students come via education agents. They are an integral part of this industry and the student recruitment life cycle. So it's understanding their needs and what they're seeing and hearing is going to be critical, because they will see when the bright sparks start happening offshore. They will be some of the first people to tell us. So, I spoke to a few education agency directors recently, just this week. Look, the counselors are at home. They're just finding their way through the process. Those with solid cash reserves will weather this, and those that are more reliant, potentially on short-term language students, will probably find the next few months a bit difficult. Agents are rightfully concerned about institutions honoring commission commitments for this term as well. Some private education providers might be financially struggling, and students have variable enrollments and potentially a lighter course load if they're studying online, and that will likely impact on accessible commission payments for them. But this is not just about commissions. Commissions are just a part of the issue. If we look forward in terms of, you mentioned about online, how do counselors effectively undertake GTE checks and document verification when they are working from home? Perhaps through Dropbox and other means of video interviewing students and verifying passports and things like that. But this will be a potential challenge that we need to overcome. And I think institutions and education agents need to be transparent in their dialogue about how they're managing it so that there are no surprises. English language testing as well. Agents are concerned about how institutions will manage when not enough students can get a seat for an IELTS or TOEFL exam when they start back up. I believe TOEFL have a new at-home test. I don't know enough about it, but I read something recently about that. There's other options like Password and Duolingo. I think, will institutions develop their own English entry tests? Some have them already. Can they be scaled effectively? And then how will these results be verified? What guarantees can institutions provide students and agents on progression based on their own in-house language assessment? The worst thing we can do is put out, tests out there and say, right, student, you only need 12 weeks. And then they arrive, we realize, oh, they need 6 months. And then we've got another range of issues of visa continuations and things like that. So, I think that this potentially is where onshore agents may look to Austrade for some assistance, or look at the government, but potentially Austrade. There's the EMDG, the Export Market Development Grant Banner, and other assistance packages. Maybe education agents onshore can come together to try to get some investment. I don't want to speak on, I'm not speaking on your behalf, Rebecca. I'm just thinking sort of out loud here, in terms of, helping this sort of part of the sector sort of get back, because again, they play an integral role to the student recruitment and how they support our industry. So, and also, I think what we'll potentially see is that, agents are often under restrictions as per the territories that they can recruit from. Typically institutions will have a list of, right, you can recruit from China, you can't recruit from India, you can recruit from the Middle East, and you can recruit onshore, but you can't recruit from Africa, whatever. And there's reasons for that, I get it. But those restrictions will likely need to be eased as quality agents look to survive, thrive, and deliver enrollments. They want to deliver enrollment outcomes to their partner institutions. So I think as we have moved to more, online sort of servicing for students' education agents are going to be obviously naturally moving more online. We're already seeing it. There's online education agents out there. You're going to see established agents be doing more online. Yeah. And again, territories are not going to matter in that situation. So we're going to have to think creatively as an industry about, English language and the GTE checks and a number of things, as we are still disparately located, and a number of counselors are working from home.
And you touched on something absolutely, and it actually touches on a question we have here from is anonymous. I was going to say that was your name, but it's not your name. And Mr. Anonymous attendee. How might this have an impact on better regulating and standardizing online education? I mean, if everything's moving online, I'm not saying everything is, but as a large chunk of the sector which is scrambling, to use that word, in order to get their content online, I guess the government then has to step in and say, right, how do you regulate that? How do you standardize it? And how do you make sure students are getting what they pay for and they're protected in many ways? I don't expect you to have an answer, Rebecca, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sure. I do think hopefully that's one of the silver linings, or one of the things that we can push through faster, because we know that certainly in countries where we have many students coming to Australia from Asia Pacific, their government's recognition of the veracity of online or the value of online has been one of the barriers to us being able to deliver. Of course, if you're in Australia on a student visa as well, that 30% restriction under normal times. I think this is a great opportunity for us to, across the globe. I mean, China themselves are seeing the benefit of their students and their major institutions moving to online. One of the partners we've been working very closely with and hope to have some more information for everyone in the coming weeks is FutureLearn. FutureLearn, which is now owned 50% by Seek, an Australian company, that between them and a number of the other online platforms are really looking to try and, even without government regulation, to set the standards. Our very own open learning and open colleges as well, looking to set those standards for how we would recognise both full online delivery, but also micro-credential and short courses. One of the things, I think it is related to the agents' ability to innovate. Agents, no doubt, are going to be feeling this very significantly at the moment. And they're also, of course, as we know, of service to their students. So they're hearing that direct distress and concern from their students. Agents in Australia, if they meet the requirements of the small business assistance package, will be able to get or will be eligible for some of that assistance. We also know that time is of the essence. A number of agents, I think, have been adapting in their student services, student support, and in digital. And I think one of the questions is, you know, what will the new normal look like? If we can't find a way to show up more effectively as Australia in a digital platform in a way that isn't completely, disconnected between 8 different states and territories and individual jurisdictions and individual institutions, if we can't find a way through this to deliver better service to students who want to study with us or people who want to partner with us, then we've missed an opportunity. And I think we've got Shanton Chang on the line as well, who's done a lot of research with students around their digital search, but also help seeking. And this is a great opportunity for us to put some of that research and knowledge into practice. The role that we're taking at Austrade, and if anyone's on the webinar or listening to this afterwards, we're taking a partnership model. We don't have the answers, but we want to pilot and partner as much as we can during this period of time so that we can find some new and innovative ways of working. And there are a heap of agents, digital partners, student support, service providers that can help us in that endeavour.
Yeah, and I think that's a prudent point, is that, you know, this is new. This is new for government. This is new for the sector. No one really knows how to best do this. So I love that, you know, here you are representing Austrade and saying we've got an open, collaborative pilot model. I mean, that's fantastic. It's it's great to hear, especially as a small business owner who is obviously faced with some issues. We might as well take a question here about the future of international student recruitment, because I think this is going to be, I mean, there's a lot of marketing, student recruitment specialists on this call, just from who I've dealt with over the years. Liz Griffin has written, what do the panel see as the future of international student recruitment, both during and after this situation resolves? I mean, I think that's a really interesting question based on what you were saying before about online. I mean, online is online. So what are you recruiting for if students, don't necessarily need to come here? And what does international education really mean if the student is not even, it's just, you can go back and back and back. And I'd just love to hear, Alec, if you'd like to sort of address that first and go from there.
Sure. Look, I think that, virtual fairs have existed for several years now, but they've really never taken off for whatever reason. I mean, I think we're quite used to, as an industry, printing the brochure, taking the brochure, going to Hong Kong IDP event and interviewing students and parents. And that is not necessarily going to change overnight. it's not going to change overnight. If anything, that will pick back up. And there's a reason for that, because we are in a people business, and consumers, being students and prospective students and parents, want the touch, the feel, and they actually want to engage with someone as part of their education investment. However, virtual fairs, there's got to be good platforms out there for virtual fairs. And I think we're going to see that significantly rise over the next year. Even if travel restrictions are, even when travel restrictions are lifted, we've got to remember that budgets are likely going to be strapped by a number of institutions. So the student recruitment travel largesse budgets that we may have once been allowed to have in terms of being able to freely travel in many, many different places, some institutions some international offices are likely to find that the going may be tough in terms of budget cuts. And so they won't have the freedom to travel to as many places as often as they did. I'm just presuming here, at least for the next year. So, as well, online student engagement platforms, perhaps where students can upload their profile, and, I think that there can be some sort of, forum there. Those sort of things will likely be developed. Peer-to-peer student engagement, I think, as I mentioned before, how we engage, how we get our current students and our prospective students engaged in sort of, real-time conversations. Some of that's happened already in terms of particularly on Weibo and Weixin, so on various Chinese, online chat groups where we may have our Chinese student ambassadors engage with prospective Chinese students, but this needs to be scaled up to students around the world. And it has to be we have to have engaging content online with student ambassadors who are allowed to speak freely, but can also talk about, the good things that are happening on campus. So that's going to be all the rage, I think, over the next few months, the next year. Face-to-face will come back. But you're going to see a lot more virtual outreach. And again, we will be leaning on our education agents a lot, as they are based offshore, and the universities that do have office structures or work from home arrangements for people in Indonesia or China or India or wherever. They are going to be even more important is our offshore based staff, because they are already there, and therefore they can start to travel more freely within their own country.
And sorry, Rebecca, you were going to say something?
I was. So cool just to have a conversation. I was just thinking, ultimately, we know that students aren't just buying a course. They are buying the transformative experience of living and studying abroad. And many of us who work in international education have had the privilege and the pleasure to be able to do that. And it's why when this situation presents itself, we have, I think, such empathy for students who are impacted, because we've been there before. So I think that the transformation and the need for this pandemic is bringing out the best and the worst. And I know that those of us who work in international education, we're here because we see the best, and we know that being globally mobile, being connected, experiencing and pushing ourselves through the lived experience is part of international education. So I know that probably preaching to the converted here, but I don't think that will ever go away. But the platforms piece and the peer-to-peer, if I can pick up on peer-to-peer, that's essentially going to how we work now with our student cohort who is here, how we support them, how our institutions and agents support them, will determine how well we're able to bounce back, because that peer-to-peer message will come from our cohort of students who are here. Now, these are extraordinary times, and we have never been in this situation before to make these decisions on how to best support those students. I think it will, there is a big onus on institutions to determine how we're going to manage that approach, and that we don't, in desperate times, turn to desperate measures, which might look like further poaching or other behaviour which is really not in the students' interests. And I will just finish this interjection just to acknowledge the role of states and territories in the study clusters, the study hubs who are working directly with students and with institutions. It's a big part of our conversation. We meet with the states and territories every week. In addition to the task force, the formalities of the task force, we're working together on a range of projects and concepts, and the student experience and managing during this time is the number one focus that we have at the moment.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think we do need to remember is that the whole world is going through this right now, and there are a lot of international students that would rather be in Australia, that understand that Australia is actually a place that isn't being affected as bad as some other countries. So I guess at the end of it, there is an opportunity. There's a silver lining to get to the end of this crisis, and we want our current international students to know that all the way through they were supported by government, state, federal, local institutions, accommodation providers, agents. That we want to show them that, if you were going to go through this crisis, it's a good thing that it happened here while you were here. And I think showing current students that and showing them through this sort of coordinated leadership is going to get more and more important as the days ahead come to us. Interestingly, I just got a notification then that ANU has just closed down its campus for 3 months. So it looks like online learning for the big group of 8. This is going to be a big deal. I mean, some of these institutions do move slowly, and it's really hard to get that stuff online. They've got huge numbers of students. And it does take me to a question here from Jeff Kim. What are the red flags to look out for in the sector? And Rebecca, you did mention poaching before, but Alec, I'd like to hear a little bit about from you in regards to from your time at universities and working with institutions. What are the red flags that will likely appear over the next few months?
Well, I guess maybe just to follow on what Rebecca was saying is just let's not shoot ourselves in the foot and have a race to the bottom here in terms of I suppose overreactionary policies of significantly upping commission rates and trying to outdo each other. And I think we need to be careful. We need to be careful that, again, the mantra is quality of our online delivery. The mantra is student well-being, which we are completely focused on. And the mantra is flexibility. Where students are not happy, don't keep the bird caged, let the student go. I mean, I think that I think we have to have flexibility here for where it's just not working out for the student, or they want to go home. So I think that the quality, the student well-being, and the flexibility, if we can maintain that, and then with a level head and as united as possible, really go back into the market once things some of the storm clouds have lifted. But yeah, so red flag, look, we need to make sure that students are engaging with their course content. We need to ensure that when the travel restrictions are lifted, that we've got mechanisms by which we're again checking GTEs and things like that, and that there are flexibility for students to move course providers where they're not happy because online just did not fulfill their needs. So there's a myriad of different things. But look, Australia has been a success as an industry because we work well together. If you look at how the state-based governments work to support us, how AUIDF and the various the IRU and the GO8s and all the myriad of groups out there, we work well together. And I think that, and you look at forums like this may not be prevalent or easily accessible in some other countries, but our industry is just the right size, and we've just got enough energy to make it happen. So red flags will appear, and I think that hopefully the government will and institutions will be able to react, but not overreact to them.
Rebecca, do you want to talk on that?
Yeah, anyone who's worked with me knows I love a good risk plan, and red flags are part of my day. I think for us in getting through this, it's another C, not intentionally, but community. I know early on in some of the questions, particularly when this was an issue seemed to be unique to China, that we had a number of challenges or experiences for students who experienced racism and or discrimination. And I think some of the first responses to that and the sector's response to that, ANU's fantastic response, viruses don't discriminate, neither do we, calling that out where we saw it, but community, continuing that community goodwill for international education and international students is so important, and it is a bit of a red flag. To be honest though, we had spoken about social license for many years prior to this as well, in terms of the some of the perceptions of international students in our community. I think compliance is always a flag, and particularly when we are being as nimble and as agile as we can in adopting changing legislation, in making special considerations. But when it comes down to the detail of how to manage or track that compliance, that is a red flag. I know someone's asked about student housing as well. Obviously, we have other services that our institutions are delivering, and other requirements. So you're just announcing ANU as an example, but I saw someone has also let us know that that doesn't include ANU's student accommodation.
Halls. Yes.
Yeah, but a red flag I think is for our sector, the people who work in education, who are going still every day, our teachers in schools who are going every day, our administrators, librarians and others. The red flag for me there is burnout. We are working so hard, and then there is the reality of the virus will impact people that we know and love, and there will be who are sick and severely impacted by this. So they're the things that I'm thinking about.
Well, that's right. I mean, these sorts of crises, they tend to set an alarm clock off in your mind that say, you need to panic, you need to worry. But if that alarm clock doesn't stop when it just turns you crazy. I mean, it means you keep worrying and worrying and worrying when you actually need to think logically. And it really does make me think about all of the people who work in this sector, as you mentioned just then. You've got campuses shutting down, you've got entire agencies. There's all these questions right here about, what happens to my education agency? We just opened it, we've got no money, got no customers, it's gone. Like, whether or not there's any support there. I'll just address that. We don't know these answers, all of them. There's a lot of questions coming here about what's going to happen to lots of different parts of the sector. I appreciate all the questions. There's about around 50 questions so far. This is great. We will have webinars about different topics every Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we're doing one on universities with Tom Gifford from RMIT, who's Assistant Director there of International. We'll do ones with the different study bodies. We'll do ones with managed student accommodation, residential colleges. And then, if you have any ideas or want to be on one of these webinars, do email me directly, and we can look into that, because this is where we have to keep the conversation moving. And I'd like to sort of touch on that sector, on that question about the sector. What can the sector be doing to better support staff well-being and anxiety related to the uncertainty of this situation, their jobs and their students? Alec, I'd like to start with you. Obviously, you've worked in a university, one of the biggest universities in the country. How would this have impacted you at the time, and how would you have reacted?
Well, look, I think that whether or not you're an international director, or you are a service provider, or sitting in the chair I'm in at right now, we need to check in on each other. Pick up the phone, send colleagues a Facebook message of support, call agents just for a chat, have a coffee via Zoom with people in the industry you haven't seen for a while. Catch up with your teams, obviously, because there needs to be continued connectivity there, even if you're not traveling. We just really need to support each other, and let's keep learning from each other. There's a lot of bright sparks in the industry with great ideas. We just need to let those ideas flourish, and then start running with them when the times right. And for students, really just go back to student well-being, we'll shoot ourselves in the foot if we ignore and isolate them. We just can't sit and forget whilst they're studying online. So whilst, working with staff and ensuring they're supported, again, we need to make sure that we're fully supporting the students. So, where international student recruitment team members who are inactive in terms of they're not actively doing student recruitment, well, let's have them either trained up or working with student support services in terms of outreach and just checking in on students from the region. I think that would go a long way to assisting our student support services. We need to listen to our students' concerns, need to learn from our own mistakes, course correct, respond quickly. Students will be engaged and trust us if we're with them and on their side and demonstrate not just empathy but action. If I can just make one plug though, I'll be AIEC have asked us, me and my Edified team to facilitate a session at AIEC in Gold Coast this October. And so very shortly, we're going to be surveying industry professionals to gauge the temperature. We're going to be gauging the temperature now, mid-year, so around June, and then just before the AIEC in Gold Coast, so we can start taking some snapshots of time. We'll have a few short questions that we'll be posing to industry stakeholders on how they're feeling, concerns they have, how they're being supported by their organizations, and what's next. It'll be anonymous, and it will feed into a facilitated session on the Friday of the AIEC. So if you'd like to take part of this industry-wide exercise, we'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll push out a message on LinkedIn very shortly, and I'll send you the information about that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, hopefully the curve is flatter by that point. We can get back to some semblance of normality. We'll see how we go. Rebecca, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about resources. There are so many resources for students right now, and we're almost at the end of this webinar, and I appreciate everyone who's been a part of this, and I won't take up too much of your time more. But yeah, I mean, could you tell us a little bit about what resources are available for the sector and for students?
Sure. I actually think there are so many resources, but probably so little of them translating into how students want to consume and how they can understand what we're trying to let them know. So let alone for us in our day-to-day lives. So as one of the resources we'll send through, and this is a trial group we're piloting, so we'll send through a pilot 2-page summary doc, and also a link to our resources hub on the Study in Australia website, because what we're trying to do as Austrade is be an aggregator of that information. So Home Affairs, Education, Health, of course, have to produce very fact-based, very every word precise in terms of meaning. We are able to take those, and with partners like you as well, with Insider Guides, turn that into, well, what does this mean for you, whether you're an accommodation provider, whether you're a vet provider, whether you're a student. So those resources are all sitting in one place. We update them on a daily basis, and we're also hopefully this week about to have a new digest that will go out to providers and agents, which will show you what's changed in the last 7 days. I do think it's one of the risks, though, spending a lot of time on social media. I don't know about you, but you know, we work and then we go and read another couple of hours about what's happening. So part of my advice to people is to be selective in the social media that you're reading and in the sources that you're engaging with. But we do have to, and this goes back to where we started, positive optimism. Our role is to work with each of you to promote Australia. And if we just focus on what's going wrong or what didn't work out the way we wanted it to, or which isn't the best outcome, then we're going to miss the opportunity to share the good stories. So it's how the notion of In This Together came about. It was an initiative of the states and territories. It was originally conceived by some students here in Queensland who wanted to let their Chinese peers know that we were in this together, and it's really morphed and changed as we've moved through different stages of the crisis. In fact, it seems to be resonating very strongly with the sector. And I think the only way we're going to deliver on those 3 C's of continuing to deliver the highest care, collaborating and still being creative is if we really do know that we're in this together. Doesn't mean we're going to get everything right, doesn't mean we'll be able to act on everything that's asked of us, but if we take that mantra, I think we've got a better chance of coming up with best solutions and best outcomes for our sector.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that's crucial in that there's a lot of information out there as well. And so I can certainly say that the stuff coming from Austrade is unbelievably up to date, relevant, factual, useful. It's fantastic. So I would encourage students to go there. We've also at Insider Guides got a COVID-19 resource hub where we bring together the news as it comes out that relates to international students, and also our own content. So things about, you know, what to do in self-isolation, mental health, mental health. We talk to nutritionists, we talk to counselors, we talk to a lot of different organizations. So we'll be promoting that through Austrade, through Insider Guides, and that is a free resource to share with all of your international students. So I encourage you to access that. I've put the link in the there, and I'll also send it out after this email with all of Rebecca's slides and materials as well. Guys, there's so many questions. I would love to get to this, but as I said, we're going to leave it there and actually focus on individual topics every week. So next week, as I said, we've got one with RMIT, and I'm really excited to hear from a university perspective about what that looks like. We just from going through my checklist of what I need to we've also got a Facebook group we've launched on our Insider Guides Facebook channel, where international students can talk about this sort of information as well. So head to Insider Guides on Facebook, and yeah, this will be recorded and sent out to all of you as well, and shared. So I will try and increase the number of registrations on the next webinar from 500 to 1,000, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, thank you for being patient with the technology, and I appreciate the panelists, Rebecca and Alec. Thank you so much for giving up your time from self-isolation, live from home.
Yeah.
Happy to be part of it, and stay safe, everyone. We're in uncertain times, but we will get through it.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
all right.
Thanks so much for your leadership, James. See ya.
All right. Thanks guys. Thanks so much. Cheers. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.